Welcome back to the sixth and final video in our series on creating a scenario with Flashpoint Campaign's Southern Storm. By this time, you should have all the knowledge and tools you need to create a scenario with Flashpoint Campaign's Scenario Editor. However, there are still 3 more screens we need to go over in the Scenario Editor. We're starting out today in the Player 2 Order of Battle screen. To go to the next screen, we press the Next button as before. This takes us to the Player Briefings screen. On this screen, you'll create the player's mission briefing and the threat assessment. We'll start with Player 1. You need to make sure that Player 1 is selected in the upper left corner under the Player column. Then make sure the mission briefing is selected under the Select column to the right. Then press the Edit button to bring up the briefing editor. The briefing editor is exactly like and functions just like the scenario description editor, which we saw earlier. You'll notice that there are 2 tabs. The first tab on the left is called the Plain Text Editor, and it is where you type in your briefing. As in the scenario description editor, it accepts HTML codes, which allows you to format your briefing. You can type the mission in any format you want to. However, you can also generate a formatted briefing to use as a guide. To create an auto-generated briefing, select the Auto Generate Briefing button in the lower left corner of the window. You'll notice that it creates a sample briefing along with the HTML codes needed to format the text. You can also use the auto-created briefing and fill in the details if you like. Or you can use part of it if you want to, but you can also add to it. The 4th line has brackets around Describe Mission Here. If you use this formatted briefing, you can type in the mission for your briefing here. Let's type in Defend the City of Amberg. If you select the HDMI text preview, you can see what your briefing looks like. You'll note that you can see the map in this preview. If we go back to the text editor, I can show you the wording that places the map along with any overlays you create for the map in the briefing. And it's this section right here that I'm going to highlight. So this part of the briefing contains the map instructions. If you design your own briefing, I recommend that you copy and paste this portion of your briefing into yours. You can move it to different places in your briefing. If you want the map at the end of the briefing, which is where I prefer it, you can just cut and paste it to the location where you want. You'll now see that the map is at the bottom of the briefing. After finishing your briefing, you want to next press the Proceed button, and your text will be added to the scenario. However, you will need to save the scenario to make it permanent. Next, let's do the threat assessment. The procedure is the same as for the mission briefing. We want to go over to the Select column and select Threat Assessment. Then we press the Edit button. You'll notice that the text editor is exactly the same. We also have an auto generate assessment button in the lower left-hand corner, and you can use this to generate a standard threat assessment if you so choose. You'll notice, like the mission briefing, it is very basic, and you'll probably want to add to it if you don't do your own. You will note that it also contains a map too if you go into the Preview tab. The portion for the map, for the threat assessment, is this part of the text itself. And again, I would recommend that you use that in your briefing if you do your own in order to properly generate a map and any overlays that you may create for that map. Once you have finished the briefing, select the Proceed button. Again, don't forget to save your scenario before closing the scenario in the editor. The Player 2 briefings are created exactly as Player 1. Once you have finished with Player 2's briefing, we will then select the next button. We're not going to do Player 2, and that will proceed to the next screen. And again, I want to remind you to save the scenario to save your briefing. Here we have the scenario summary screen. This page will show you the number of runners or subunits by type for each side. Also, information regarding how victory is calculated and the different levels of success are displayed based on the current conditions in the scenario. If you go back into the scenario and make changes to the scenario, it could change the percentages for the victory levels. After you have finished reviewing this page, we want to proceed to the next and the last screen by pressing the next button. This is the scenario details and note screen. Here we have a place for the author to put in his information if he so desires, along with any notes he would like to add regarding the scenario. But if you look down at the last window, it is entitled the Scenario Validation Notes. If there are any problems within the scenario that needs to be corrected in order to play, they will be listed here. You'll note that this scenario has some issues that need to be corrected. It needs a scenario description. It needs a mission briefing for Player 2. It needs a threat assessment for Player 2. And there's 2 units on the American side which were not deployed to the map. As you correct these deficiencies, they should be removed from this list. Let's go back. We have the 3rd Platoon Alpha Company Task Force 110 and 1st Platoon Charlie Company Task Force 110, which are not deployed. So let's go back to the Order of Battle screen for the Americans. We'll come down here and we're going to look at the force roster for the Alpha Company. And you'll notice here's the 3rd Platoon. It's not deployed on the map, so let's select a hex to place it in. Click on the counter and it is placed on the map just as we've seen before. Now let's come down to Charlie Company, and here's the platoon that's not deployed, so we'll come up here and we will deploy it on the map. Now let's go back to the last page, and you'll notice those 2 issues have been removed. If for some reason they're not removed, you can click on the update button, and that would refresh the scenario validation notes, and it should remove them if that time, if for some reason it didn't do it before that. This concludes the videos on how to build your own scenario in Flashpoint Campaign Southern Storm. And I hope that these videos were beneficial to you, especially if you want to build your own scenario. If you have any questions, you can post them in the Flashpoint campaign forum on the Matrix site, and I or somebody else on the development team will do our best to answer them for you there. So good luck, and I hope you're successful in building your own scenarios.